The gunshots echoed across the open prairie as Rebecca Dawson clutched the leather seat of the stagecoach, her knuckles white with fear. This was supposed to be a simple journey to Silver Creek, to start her new life as a schoolteacher, not a fight for survival against ruthless outlaws. It was the spring of 1876, and the Montana Territory was still wild and untamed. Rebecca had left behind her comfortable life in Boston after her father's passing left the family in financial ruin. At 22, with nothing but a teaching certificate and a trunk full of books, she had answered an advertisement seeking an educated woman to teach the children of Silver Creek's growing population. "Get down, miss," shouted the driver as another bullet splintered the wood just inches from Rebecca's head. Rebecca pressed herself against the floor of the stagecoach, her heart hammering in her chest. She could hear the thundering of hooves, the wild whoops of the bandits as they circled the coach like wolves. Through the small window, she caught glimpses of dust-covered men with bandanas pulled up over their faces, six-shooters blazing in the afternoon sun. "Your money or your lives," a gruff voice called out. "We ain't asking twice." The stagecoach lurched as the driver pulled hard on the reins, bringing the vehicle to a skidding halt. The other passenger, an elderly banker named Mr. Holloway, looked at Rebecca with fear in his rheumy eyes. "They'll kill us all," he whispered. "The Blackwater Gang doesn't leave witnesses." Rebecca swallowed hard, her throat dry with fear. She had heard stories of the notorious Blackwater Gang outlaws who terrorized the stagecoach routes throughout the territory, known for their brutality and greed. The door of the coach was wrenched open, and Rebecca found herself staring down the barrel of a revolver. The man holding it had cold, dead eyes that sent a chill through her body. Well, what do we have here?" he sneered, his gaze traveling over Rebecca in a way that made her skin crawl. "Looks like we got ourselves a lady of quality, boys," the other bandits laughed, a sound that held no humor, only menace. "Please," Rebecca said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm just a schoolteacher. I have nothing of value." "I'll be the judge of that," the bandit replied, reaching for her arm to drag her from the coach. Suddenly, a single gunshot cracked through the air, different from the wild firing of before. The bandit at the door jerked backward, dropping his weapon as he clutched his shoulder. "What the?" he started, but never finished. Another shot rang out, and then another. The bandits scattered, searching for the source of this new threat. Rebecca peered cautiously through the window and saw a lone figure on horseback emerging from a cloud of dust and gun smoke on a ridge above them. The rider urged his horse down the slope at breakneck speed, firing with deadly accuracy as he came. The bandits returned fire, but the mysterious defender seemed untouchable, weaving through their bullets like a ghost. As he drew closer, Rebecca could make out more details: tall and broad-shouldered, his face partially obscured by the brim of his hat, a long duster coat billowing behind him as he rode. In each hand he held a revolver, and he wielded them with the confidence of a man who had spent years perfecting his aim. "It's Jackson," one of the bandits shouted in panic. "Jackson X, we gotta go." The name meant nothing to Rebecca, but the effect it had on the bandits was immediate. Their organized attack dissolved into chaos as they scrambled to escape. The leader of the gang fired a few defiant shots at the approaching rider before turning his horse to flee. "This ain't over, Jackson," he shouted over his shoulder. Rebecca watched in awe as the mysterious Jackson continued his pursuit, picking off two more bandits before the rest disappeared into the distant hills. Only when the last of them had vanished did he slow his horse to a trot and approach the stagecoach. Up close, Jackson X was even more imposing. Dust and sweat streaked his face but couldn't hide his strong jaw and piercing blue eyes. A thin scar ran from his right temple down to his cheekbone, the mark of a man who had seen his share of trouble. "Everyone all right in there?" he asked, his voice deep but gentle. Rebecca found herself momentarily unable to speak, caught between relief and lingering fear. Mr. Holloway answered for her. "Thanks to you, sir. They'd have killed us sure as shootin'." Jackson dismounted in one fluid motion and approached the coach. He holstered one revolver but kept the other ready, scanning the horizon with practiced vigilance. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat to Rebecca. "Are you hurt?" Rebecca shook her head, finally finding her voice. "No, thank you saved our lives." She stepped down from the coach, legs trembling slightly. Now that the immediate danger had passed, the full weight of what had just happened began to settle on her shoulders. "The driver?" she asked suddenly, looking toward the front of the coach. Jackson's expression darkened. "I'm sorry, madam." "He didn't make it." Rebecca's hand went to her mouth, stifling a cry. The driver had been a kind older man who had told her stories of the territory throughout their journey, pointing out landmarks and sharing local legends to pass the time. "The guard's wounded but alive," Jackson continued, gesturing to where the shotgun messenger lay propped against a wheel, clutching his bloodied arm. "We need to get him to a doctor." "Silver Creek is still 15 miles ahead," Mr. Holloway said, checking his pocket watch with shaking hands. "We'll never make it before nightfall, not without a driver." "I'll drive," Jackson said simply. "Need to bury the dead first, though. It ain't right to leave a man for the scavengers." As Jackson set about the grim task, Rebecca found herself studying him. There was efficiency in his movements, but also respect as he wrapped the driver's body in a blanket. This was a man accustomed to death, yet not hardened to it. "You know how to shoot, madam?" Jackson asked as he finished digging a shallow grave some distance from the road. Rebecca blinked in surprise at the unexpected question. "No, my father never thought it proper for a lady to handle firearms." Jackson nodded, then unholstered one of his revolvers and held it out to her, handle first. "No time like the present to learn. Those bandits might come back with reinforcements." Rebecca stared at the weapon, hesitant. It was heavy in her hand, foreign and frightening. "Keep your finger off the trigger until you mean to shoot," Jackson instructed. "Point it away from anything you don't want to destroy. If you need to use it, aim for the center of the body. Don't try for fancy shots." The practicality of his instructions helped calm her nerves. "Are you always this prepared for disaster, Mr. X?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Just Jackson, madam. And in my line of work, being prepared is the difference between breathing and not." "And what is your line of work exactly?" she asked, carefully placing the revolver in her lap as they climbed back into the stagecoach. Jackson took the driver's position while Mr. Holloway helped the wounded guard into the coach. "I hunt men who need hunting," he replied, his voice carrying on the wind as he snapped the reins to get the horses moving. The stagecoach lurched forward, and Rebecca settled back into her seat, the weight of the revolver a constant reminder of how quickly life could change in this wild country. As they continued their journey, the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the vast Montana sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. The beauty of it struck Rebecca, even as her mind replayed the terrifying events of the afternoon. How strange that such violence and such splendor could exist in the same moment. "Those men called you by name," she said when they stopped briefly to water the horses. "They seemed afraid of you." Jackson was checking the harnesses, his movements precise and practiced. "The Blackwater Gang and I have crossed paths before. They've lost men to me." "You're a lawman then?" "Not exactly." He straightened up, meeting her gaze. "I was a Union scout during the war, after I tracked deserters for the Army. Now I work for the stage company. They hire me when routes get too dangerous for regular guards." "A bounty hunter," Rebecca said, understanding dawning. "Some call it that." He shrugged. "I prefer to think of it as keeping good folks safe from bad ones." There was something in his tone that suggested the distinction mattered to him. Rebecca found herself curious about what had shaped this man, what drove him to choose such a dangerous and solitary life. As they continued toward Silver Creek, Jackson shared what he knew of the Blackwater Gang, a vicious group of former Confederate soldiers and opportunists who had been terrorizing the territory for nearly 2 years, led by a man called Silas Cole. "They're not just thieves," Jackson explained. They've murdered whole families, burned ranches. The territorial governors put a $5,000 bounty on Cole's head, but he's slippery, always one step ahead. And you're tracking him? Rebecca asked. Been on his trail for 6 months, Jackson confirmed. Lost him near the Bitterroot Mountains last week. Picked up the trail again yesterday. Didn't expect him to hit this coach, though. He must be getting desperate. The sun had fully set by the time the lights of Silver Creek came into view. The small frontier town was little more than a main street with a handful of businesses, but to Rebecca's weary eyes, it looked like salvation. They pulled up in front of the doctor's office first, where Jackson carried the wounded guard inside. Rebecca and Mr. Holloway followed, both exhausted from the ordeal. The town doctor, a gray-haired man named Dr. Simmons, took one look at them and started issuing orders to his assistant. "Get these folks some coffee and blankets, Mary. They're half frozen and in shock." As Mary, a kind-faced woman in her 40s, draped a wool blanket over Rebecca's shoulders, the door to the doctor's office burst open. A tall man with an impressive mustache and a silver star pinned to his vest strode in, his hand resting on the butt of his revolver. "Heard there was trouble," he said, his keen eyes sweeping the room before settling on Jackson. "Should have known you'd be in the middle of it, Sheriff," Jackson acknowledged with a nod. "Blackwater Gang hit the northbound stage, 6 men led by Cole himself." The sheriff's expression darkened. "Any casualties?" "Driver didn't make it. Guard took a bullet to the arm, 2 passengers shaken but unharmed." The sheriff turned his attention to Rebecca and Mr. Holloway. "Madam, sir, I'm Sheriff Thomas Grant. I'll need statements from both of you, but it can wait until morning. Town hotel's got rooms ready." Rebecca nodded gratefully. The thought of a real bed after the day's events was almost too wonderful to contemplate. "Miss Dawson is the new schoolteacher," Mr. Holloway informed the sheriff. "And I'm needed at the bank first thing tomorrow." "Schoolteacher, eh?" Sheriff Grant smiled kindly at Rebecca. "Town's been looking forward to your arrival, Miss Dawson. The children haven't had proper schooling since Miss Jenkins left to get married last fall." Despite her exhaustion, Rebecca felt a flutter of purpose. This was why she had come, after all, to make a difference in this frontier community, to bring knowledge and refinement to a place still rough around the edges. "I'm eager to begin," she said, straightening her shoulders. "Though I admit, today's welcome was rather more exciting than I had anticipated." That drew a chuckle from the men. Even Jackson's stern expression softened slightly. "Sheriff," Jackson said, moving toward the door, "I need to have a word with you about Cole. I think he's planning something bigger than stage robberies." The 2 men stepped outside, their voices lowering to an indistinct murmur. Rebecca found her gaze following Jackson, this enigmatic man who had appeared from nowhere to save them and now seemed eager to continue his pursuit. Mary gently touched her arm. "Come along, Miss Dawson. I'll show you to the hotel. You look dead on your feet." Rebecca allowed herself to be led down the town's main street to a 2-story building with Silver Creek Hotel painted on a wooden sign above the door. The lobby was simple but clean, with a pot-bellied stove providing welcome warmth. The hotel proprietor, a widow named Mrs. Landry, clucked sympathetically when she heard about Rebecca's ordeal. "Dreadful business, those bandits. Thank goodness Mr. X was nearby. He's got a fearsome reputation among the outlaws, you know." "So I gathered," Rebecca said, thinking of how the bandits had scattered at the mere mention of Jackson's name. "He seems complicated," Mrs. Landry nodded knowingly. "That he is. Been staying here on and off for months while he hunts the Blackwater Gang. Keeps to himself mostly, but he's always polite. Pays on time, doesn't cause trouble. That's more than I can say for most men in his line of work." She handed Rebecca a key. "Room 4, top of the stairs. It's not fancy, but it's clean. Bathrooms at the end of the hall. Breakfast starts at 6. Rebecca thanked her and climbed the stairs, her body aching with fatigue. The room was indeed simple: a narrow bed, a washstand with a pitcher and bowl, a small writing desk, and a wardrobe. But after the day she'd had, it seemed like the height of luxury. She was just finishing her ablutions when a soft knock sounded at her door. Cautiously, she approached. "Who is it?" "Jackson X, madam, brought your trunk from the stage." Rebecca opened the door to find him standing there, her large trunk balanced effortlessly on one shoulder. In his other hand, he held her carpetbag. "Oh, thank you. I'd completely forgotten about my belongings." He set the trunk down at the foot of her bed and placed the carpetbag beside it. "Thought you might need your things. Stage company will send word to the families of the driver and guard. There'll be an investigation, but I doubt Cole will let his boys anywhere near town for a while." Rebecca noticed he still wore his gun belt, and there was a tension in his bearing that hadn't been there earlier. "You're leaving, aren't you, to go after them?" He nodded. "Cole's trail is fresh, can't afford to lose it again." "But it's dark and you must be tired," she protested. "Surely it could wait until morning." "Outlaws don't rest, Miss Dawson, so neither can I." He tipped his hat to her. "Town's safe enough. Sheriff Grant's a good man. He'll look after you until you get settled." Rebecca felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. This man had saved her life, yet she knew nothing about him beyond his name and occupation. He'd ride off into the night and she might never see him again. "Will you?" She started, then hesitated, unsure what she even wanted to ask. "Will you be careful? Will you come back?" Jackson seemed to understand her unspoken questions. His stern expression softened slightly. "I'll check in when I return to town. Make sure you're settling in all right." "I'd like that," she said, then added more formally, "I owe you my gratitude, Mr. X. Not many would have risked themselves for strangers as you did today." Something flickered in his eyes, a shadow of an emotion Rebecca couldn't quite identify. "No debt between us, Miss Dawson, just doing what needed doing." He touched his hat again in farewell. "Lock your door, sleep well." And then he was gone, his footsteps fading down the hallway. Rebecca closed and locked the door as instructed, then sank onto the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the events of the day. She had traveled west expecting adventure, but not the kind that involved gunfights and dashing rescuers. As she prepared for bed, Rebecca found herself wondering about Jackson X. What had brought him to this life? What drove him to pursue dangerous men across the wilderness with such single-minded determination? And why did she feel such a strong connection to someone she had known for mere hours? With these thoughts swirling in her mind, Rebecca finally surrendered to exhaustion, falling into a deep sleep filled with dreams of gunsmoke and piercing blue eyes. The next morning dawned clear and bright, a stark contrast to the chaos of the previous day. Rebecca rose early, eager to explore the town that would be her home for the foreseeable future. Dressed in her second-best traveling outfit, a modest blue dress with white trim, she made her way downstairs to the hotel dining room. Several of the town's residents were already gathered for breakfast, and a hush fell over the room as she entered. News traveled fast in small towns, and it was clear everyone knew who she was and what she had survived. Mrs. Landry bustled over, leading Rebecca to a table where a plump, cheerful woman in her 40s was already seated. "Miss Dawson, this is Mrs. Helen Peterson, head of our school board. She's been most anxious to meet you." Mrs. Peterson greeted Rebecca warmly, expressing both delight at her arrival and horror at her experience with the bandits. "We've been so worried since we got word of the attack. To think you might have been killed before even reaching us, it's too dreadful to contemplate." Rebecca assured her that she was quite well and still very much looking forward to teaching. As they discussed the school and the curriculum over eggs and coffee, Rebecca learned that classes were held in a small building at the edge of town, with about 20 students ranging from 6 to 16 years of age. "It's not much compared to Eastern schools, I'm sure," Mrs. Peterson said apologetically, "but we've collected quite a few books and the children are eager to learn." "I'm certain it will be perfectly adequate," Rebecca replied. "I believe strongly that education depends more on enthusiasm than facilities." Mrs. Peterson beamed at this response. "Oh, you'll do just fine here, Miss Dawson. Just fine indeed." After breakfast, Mrs. Peterson took Rebecca on a tour of the town. Silver Creek had grown considerably in the 5 years since silver had been discovered in the nearby mountains. What had once been little more than a trading post now boasted a general store, a bank, a saloon, a small hotel, a church, the doctor's office, a blacksmith, and a handful of other businesses. About 30 houses of varying sizes were scattered around these establishments, with more being built all the time. "The mine brings in new folks every month," Mrs. Peterson explained as they walked. "Mostly men at first, but now families are starting to come. That's why we needed a proper teacher." The schoolhouse was a simple structure with a bell tower on top. Inside, there were rows of rough-hewn benches and desks, a larger desk for the teacher, a blackboard, and shelves lined with books. A pot-bellied stove stood in one corner for heating during the harsh Montana winters. "It's charming," Rebecca said sincerely. Despite its rustic appearance, she could see the care that had gone into creating this place of learning. "Your living quarters are through that door," Mrs. Peterson said, pointing to the back of the schoolhouse. "Just 2 rooms, a bedroom and a sitting room with a small stove for cooking. The town provides firewood, and there's a pump out back for water." The rooms were indeed small but tidy, with simple furniture and cheerful curtains at the windows. Rebecca could imagine herself quite comfortable here, surrounded by books and the sounds of children learning. As they returned to the main street, Rebecca caught sight of Sheriff Grant speaking with a group of men outside his office. They appeared to be organizing some sort of search party, with maps spread across the hood of a wagon and rifles being distributed. "What's happening there?" she asked Mrs. Peterson. The older woman's expression grew serious. "Posse. After what happened to your stagecoach, the sheriff's determined to do something about the Blackwater Gang. They've been a plague on this region for too long." "But I thought Mr. X. Jackson was already pursuing them." "Oh, he is," Mrs. Peterson confirmed, "but he works alone. Sheriff Grant believes a larger force might have better luck cornering Cole and his men." Rebecca felt a flutter of concern, remembering how effectively the bandits had attacked the stagecoach. "Isn't that dangerous? These men seem quite ruthless." "Very dangerous," Mrs. Peterson agreed grimly. "But the alternative is to live in fear, with commerce and travel constantly under threat. No one wants that." As they watched, the men mounted their horses and rode out of town, the sheriff at their head. Rebecca couldn't help wondering if they would cross paths with Jackson, and if so, whether they would help or hinder his pursuit. Over the next few days, Rebecca settled into her new role as Silver Creek schoolteacher. The children, though initially shy with their new instructor, quickly warmed to her patient teaching style and genuine interest in their progress. She introduced them to poetry and literature, improved their arithmetic, and began teaching the older students some basic Latin and French. In the evenings, she prepared lessons and wrote letters to her mother and sister back in Boston, describing her new life in detail. She omitted the more frightening aspects of her journey, not wanting to worry them unnecessarily. A week after her arrival, as Rebecca was dismissing her students for the day, she looked up to see a familiar figure leaning against the doorframe. Jackson X had returned to Silver Creek. He looked different than she remembered, more rugged, with several days' growth of beard shadowing his jaw. His clothes were dusty from the trail, and there was a weariness in his stance that hadn't been there before. But his eyes were as alert as ever as they swept over the departing children before coming to rest on her. "Mr. X," she said, surprised at how pleased she felt to see him again. "You've returned, Miss Dawson," he replied with a nod. "Thought I'd see how you were settling in." The last child scampered out, leaving them alone in the schoolhouse. Rebecca gathered her papers, suddenly self-conscious. "I'm settling in quite well, thank you. The children are wonderful and everyone has been very kind." Jackson stepped further into the room, examining the books on her desk with interest. "Teaching them about the ancient Romans, I see." "You know Latin?" Rebecca asked, surprised. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. enough to recognize Caesar's commentaries. My father was a professor before he took up farming. He believed in education. This glimpse into his background intrigued Rebecca. The man standing before her was clearly more complex than the hard-edged bounty hunter she had initially taken him for. "Were you successful?" she asked, changing the subject. "In your pursuit of the bandits, I mean." His expression darkened. "Tracked them to an abandoned mining camp near the Idaho border, had a skirmish. Killed 2 of them, but Cole and the others escaped. I followed until my horse went lame." "I'm sorry," Rebecca said, genuinely disappointed for him. Jackson shrugged. "It's part of the job. Cole's running scared now, made mistakes, left a trail. I'll find him eventually." There was such certainty in his voice that Rebecca didn't doubt him for a moment. This man would not give up until his quarry was captured or dead. "The sheriff organized a posse after you left," she told him. "Have you spoken with him yet?" Just came from there. "Grant's men returned 3 days ago, found nothing but cold trails and false leads." There was no criticism in his tone, just a statement of fact. Cole knows these mountains better than most, hides his tracks well. An awkward silence fell between them. Rebecca realized she had been hoping for more from this reunion, some indication that his promise to check on her had been more than mere politeness. But Jackson remained by the door, his posture suggesting he was ready to leave at any moment. "How long will you stay in town?" she asked, trying to keep the conversation going. "A day or 2, need supplies, horse needs rest." He hesitated, then added, "Thought I might attend the town social tomorrow night if I'm welcome." Rebecca blinked in surprise. The social was a monthly gathering at the church hall where the community came together for food, music, and dancing. It seemed an oddly frivolous event for someone like Jackson to attend. "Of course you'd be welcome," she said. "You're something of a hero in Silver Creek now after what happened with the Stagecoach." He looked uncomfortable at the suggestion. "No hero, Miss Dawson, just doing my job." "Well, I hope you'll save me a dance," she said, surprising herself with her boldness. "It would be nice to share a more pleasant experience than our first meeting." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or something warmer. "I'd be honored, Miss Dawson, though I should warn you I'm not much of a dancer." "Then we'll muddle through together," she replied with a smile. "I'm not particularly accomplished myself." Jackson touched his hat in a gesture that was becoming familiar. "Until tomorrow night, then." As he turned to go, Rebecca called after him. "Mr. X," he paused, looking back at her, "I'm glad you returned safely." For a moment, his usual stoic expression softened into something that might have been a genuine smile. "Thank you, Miss Dawson. So am I." The next evening, Rebecca spent more time than usual preparing for the social. She laid out her best dress, a forest green taffeta with delicate lace trim that she had packed for special occasions. Her long auburn hair, usually confined to a practical bun for teaching, she arranged in a more becoming style, with soft curls framing her face. As she pinned a small cameo brooch to her collar, Rebecca caught herself smiling at her reflection and felt a moment of confusion. Why was she taking such care with her appearance? It was just a town social, after all, and Jackson X was merely an acquaintance who had happened to save her life. Yet there was something about him that intrigued her, perhaps the contrast between his dangerous profession and the glimpses of education and thoughtfulness she had seen. Or perhaps it was simply that he was unlike any man she had met in Boston, where gentlemen were polished but predictable. The church hall was already crowded when Rebecca arrived. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the proceedings. Tables laden with food lined one wall, and a small group of local musicians played lively tunes on fiddles, a banjo, and an accordion. Children darted between the adults, playing games of their own invention, while couples young and old took to the cleared space in the center of the room for dancing. Mrs. Peterson spotted her immediately and hurried over. "Miss Dawson, don't you look lovely? Come, let me introduce you properly to everyone." For the next half hour, Rebecca was led around the room, meeting what seemed like the entire population of Silver Creek. Everyone was welcoming, but she found it hard to keep track of all the names and faces. She kept glancing toward the door, watching for Jackson's arrival. He finally appeared just as the musicians were starting a lively reel. The room seemed to hush slightly as he entered, conversations faltering as heads turned to observe the bounty hunter who rarely participated in community gatherings. Jackson had made an effort with his appearance. His clothes, while still practical, were clean and less trail-worn than usual. He'd shaved, revealing the strong line of his jaw, and his dark hair was neatly combed. He looked handsome, Rebecca realized with a small shock. Quite handsome indeed. His eyes found her almost immediately, and he made his way through the crowd toward her. Several people greeted him as he passed, but his responses were brief, his focus clearly elsewhere. "Miss Dawson," he said when he reached her, tipping his hat. "You look beautiful tonight." The simple compliment brought a flush to Rebecca's cheeks. "Thank you, Mr. X. You look quite dashing yourself." A hint of color touched his own face at her words. "Clean, at least. That's about the best I can manage on the trail." The music changed to a slower waltz, and Jackson glanced toward the dancers. "I believe I promised you a dance," he said, offering his arm. "Shall we?" Rebecca placed her hand on his arm, feeling the solid strength beneath the fabric of his sleeve. "I'd be delighted." As they moved to join the other dancers, Rebecca was aware of curious glances following them. Clearly, the sight of the solitary bounty hunter dancing with the new schoolteacher was providing the townsfolk with an interesting topic of conversation. Jackson's earlier warning about his dancing proved unnecessary. He moved with the natural grace of a man comfortable in his body, guiding her smoothly around the floor. His hand at her waist was warm and steady, maintaining a respectful distance while still holding her securely. "You dance very well for someone who claimed to be unskilled," Rebecca observed, looking up at him. "My mother insisted I learn the basics," he replied. "Said a man should know how to conduct himself in civilized company, no matter what path he chose in life." She sounds like a wise woman. Something like sadness crossed his features. "She was." The past tense told Rebecca all she needed to know. "I'm sorry for your loss." He nodded in acknowledgement but didn't elaborate. Instead, he changed the subject. "How are you finding teaching here? Different from back east, I imagine." Rebecca allowed him his privacy. "Very different, but in wonderful ways. The children are eager to learn, and there's a rawness here that's refreshing. In Boston, everything feels so established, so rigid. Here, it feels as though everything is still being shaped, still becoming." "That's a good way of putting it," Jackson said, seeming genuinely interested in her perspective. "This country's still young out here, still finding its character." They continued talking as they danced, discovering shared interests in literature and history. Jackson revealed that he had attended 2 years of university before the war interrupted his studies. Rebecca spoke of her father's library, which had been her sanctuary growing up, and her disappointment at having to sell most of the books to cover family debts. When the music ended, Jackson led her to the refreshment table, where they continued their conversation over cups of punch. Rebecca found herself relaxing in his company, forgetting the curious glances of the townspeople around them. "You're not what I expected, Mr. X," she admitted at one point, his eyebrow quirked up. "What did you expect?" "I'm not sure," she said thoughtfully. "Someone rougher perhaps, less contemplative." "Bounty hunting doesn't require much philosophy," he said dryly. "Just good tracking skills and better aim." "Yet you carry Caesar in your saddlebags and can quote Shakespeare," she countered, referencing something he had mentioned earlier. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Books are good company on lonely trails." Before Rebecca could respond, Sheriff Grant approached their table. "Sorry to interrupt, folks, but I need a word with you, X." Jackson's expression immediately shifted, the warmth Rebecca had glimpsed disappearing behind a professional mask. "What is it, Grant?" "Got a telegram from Fort Benton. Army patrol spotted what might be the Blackwater Gang near the Missouri River crossing. Thought you'd want to know." Jackson was already on his feet. "When?" "Yesterday morning. They were headed south." Jackson nodded, his mind clearly already calculating distances and travel times. "I'll ride at first light." The sheriff glanced at Rebecca, then back to Jackson. "Sorry to cut your evening short, Miss Dawson." "Quite all right, Sheriff," she replied, trying to hide her disappointment. "Mr. X has important work to do." After the sheriff departed, Jackson turned to Rebecca, regret evident in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Miss Dawson. Duty calls." "I understand," she said, forcing a smile. "Men like Cole need to be brought to justice." Jackson hesitated, seeming to struggle with something. Finally, he said, "Would you allow me to write to you while I'm on the trail?" The request surprised and pleased her. "I'd like that very much." "I can't promise regular letters," he warned. "Sometimes weeks pass without a chance to send mail." "I understand," Rebecca assured him. "I'll look forward to hearing from you whenever possible." Something in his expression softened. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Dawson. It's been a pleasant evening." "Perhaps we can have another when you return," she suggested. He nodded, though something in his eyes suggested he didn't entirely believe it would happen. "Perhaps we can." The next morning, Rebecca rose early and made her way to the general store, which also served as the town's post office. She had spent half the night composing a letter to Jackson, wanting to give him something to take with him on the trail. As she approached, she saw Jackson himself outside the store, loading supplies onto his horse. He looked once again the part of the determined bounty hunter, his expression focused and serious as he checked the cinches on his saddle. "Mr. X," she called, quickening her pace. He looked up, surprise and something warmer flickering across his features when he saw her. "Miss Dawson." "You're up early." "I wanted to catch you before you left," she explained, suddenly feeling shy. She held out the envelope, "A letter for your journey." Jackson accepted it with a gentle touch as if it were something precious. "Thank you, I'll cherish it on the trail." "Be careful," she said, unable to keep the concern from her voice. "The Blackwater Gang is dangerous." "So am I," he replied simply. Then more gently, "I'll be back, Rebecca, you have my word." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent a small thrill through her. "I'll hold you to that, Jackson," she responded, deliberately using his first name as well. He smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed his stern features and lit his blue eyes. Without warning, he reached out and took her hand, bringing it briefly to his lips in a gesture both courtly and intimate. "Until next time," he said softly, then mounted his horse in one fluid motion. Rebecca watched as he rode out of town, the rising sun at his back casting his silhouette in bold relief against the Montana sky. Only when he had disappeared from view did she realize she was still standing in the middle of the street, her hand tingling where his lips had touched it. The weeks that followed took on a rhythm for Rebecca. Her days were filled with teaching, preparing lessons, and becoming more integrated into the community of Silver Creek. She joined the Ladies' Aid Society, helped organize a small library corner in the general store, and even began giving reading lessons to several adults in the evenings. But always at the back of her mind was the thought of Jackson. Where was he? Was he safe? Had he found Cole and his gang? True to his word, letters came irregularly but treasured all the more for their scarcity. They were never long, but each one offered a glimpse into his world and his thoughts. He wrote of the vast, untamed beauty of the Montana Territory, of the satisfaction of reading by campfire light, of his determination to bring Cole to justice. And between the lines, Rebecca sensed something more, a loneliness perhaps, or a yearning for connection that echoed her own. His letters never spoke directly of feelings, yet there was a warmth to them that went beyond mere friendship. In her replies, Rebecca wrote of her life in Silver Creek, the progress of her students, the small dramas and joys of the growing town. But she also shared her thoughts on books they had both read, her dreams for the future, and her growing affection for the rugged land that was becoming her home. 2 months after Jackson's departure, disaster struck Silver Creek. A fire broke out in the dry summer heat, starting in the livery stable and quickly spreading to nearby buildings. The entire town turned out to fight the blaze, forming bucket brigades from the creek to the burning structures. Rebecca worked alongside everyone else, passing buckets and helping to evacuate those nearest to the flames. By dawn, the fire was finally contained, but not before it had destroyed the livery, the saloon, and damaged several other buildings, including the schoolhouse. The town gathered in the church to assess the damage and plan repairs. Rebecca sat with Mrs. Peterson, both of them exhausted and smoke-stained from the night's efforts. "The school roof is half gone," Sheriff Grant reported grimly. "Most of the books survived, but it'll take weeks to rebuild." "Where will the children have lessons in the meantime?" Rebecca asked, concerned about interrupting their education. "We can use the church," Reverend Walker offered, "at least until the school is repaired." As the town made plans for recovery, Rebecca couldn't help thinking of Jackson. Would news of the fire reach him in his travels? Would he worry about her safety? That evening, as she was helping salvage what she could from the schoolhouse, a rider galloped into town, covered in dust and clearly having ridden hard. It wasn't Jackson, but a young Army lieutenant who headed straight for the sheriff's office, curious. Rebecca followed, joining the small crowd that had gathered outside to hear the news. "Blackwater Gang hit a payroll wagon near Fort Benton," the lieutenant was explaining to Sheriff Grant. "Killed 2 soldiers and the driver, made off with over $5,000. A murmur ran through the crowd. It was the boldest attack the gang had attempted, yet directly targeting the U.S. Army rather than civilian stagecoaches. Any sign of Jackson X?" someone in the crowd called out. The lieutenant nodded grimly. "He was on their trail when I left. Word is he's closer than he's ever been. The Army's offering additional reward money for Cole's capture, dead or alive." Rebecca felt a chill at those words. The closer Jackson got to Cole, the more dangerous his pursuit became. Cole would not be taken easily, and he had 5 desperate men at his side. That night, she wrote Jackson a lengthy letter, telling him about the fire but assuring him she was safe, updating him on the town's recovery efforts, and most importantly urging him to be careful in his pursuit of Cole. "I know you must bring him to justice," she wrote. "But please don't take unnecessary risks. There are those who would grieve deeply if harm came to you. I count myself among them." She sealed the letter but had no way to send it, not knowing where Jackson might be. All she could do was keep it safe until she had the opportunity to give it to him or send it to wherever he might be found. Another week passed, bringing cooler weather and progress on rebuilding the damaged structures. The community had pulled together admirably, with even the miners from the hills coming down to help with repairs. The schoolhouse now had a new roof and freshly whitewashed walls, and classes were set to resume there the following Monday. Rebecca was arranging books on the shelves of the repaired schoolhouse when she heard a commotion in the street outside. Curious, she stepped to the window and saw a crowd gathering near the sheriff's office. At the center of the crowd was a rider on a weary horse, and even from a distance, she recognized Jackson's broad-shouldered silhouette. Her heart leapt, and she abandoned her task immediately, hurrying outside to join the gathering townsfolk. As she drew closer, she could see that Jackson looked different, gaunt and haggard, with a bloody bandage visible on his left arm. But what truly caught her attention was the second horse he was leading. Draped over its saddle was what appeared to be a body, wrapped in canvas and tied securely. Sheriff Grant was examining the bundle, his expression grim but satisfied. "You got him, then?" Jackson nodded, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Silas Cole, dead. The rest of the gang scattered. Army patrol picked up 2 of them near the Yellowstone. The others won't last long without Cole's leadership." A cheer went up from the crowd. The notorious outlaw who had terrorized the region for so long was finally brought to justice. Rebecca pushed her way through to the front, her eyes meeting Jackson's. For a moment, the weariness in his face gave way to something warmer, something that made her heart beat faster. "You're hurt," she said, gesturing to his bandaged arm. "It's nothing," he dismissed. "Bullet grazed me. Dr. Simmons can look at it later. Sheriff Grant was examining Cole's body. We'll need a statement for the territorial marshal, and there's the matter of the reward. Jackson nodded absently, his eyes still on Rebecca. Later, Grant, I need a meal and about 12 hours sleep first, the sheriff chuckled. Fair enough, I'll take care of this. He gestured to Cole's body. You get some rest. As the crowd began to disperse, Rebecca approached Jackson. Come to the schoolhouse, she said softly. I've got coffee brewing and it's quieter than the hotel or the saloon. He hesitated only briefly before nodding. Let me stable my horse first. I'll be there shortly. Rebecca hurried back to prepare. She stoked the fire in the stove, set water to boil for fresh coffee, and brought out the bread and cheese she had packed for her lunch. It wasn't much, but it would suffice until something more substantial could be arranged. Jackson arrived 20 minutes later, looking slightly more presentable. He'd washed the trail dust from his face and hands, though his clothes were still travel-worn and his eyes heavy with fatigue. Sit, Rebecca instructed, pointing to a chair she had pulled up near the stove. You look dead on your feet. He complied without argument, sinking into the chair with a barely suppressed groan. Been in the saddle for 3 days straight, he admitted, didn't want to lose Cole's trail again. Rebecca poured him coffee in the largest mug she had, adding a generous spoonful of sugar. Drink this, it'll help revive you. Jackson accepted the mug gratefully, wrapping his hands around it as if absorbing its warmth. Thank you. Are you hungry? I have some bread and cheese. It's not much, but it's perfect, he assured her, accepting the simple fare with appreciation. Best meal I've had in weeks. As he ate, Rebecca took the opportunity to really look at him. Beyond the obvious exhaustion, there was something different in his demeanor, a sense of resolution, perhaps, or the lifting of a burden long carried. So it's over, she said softly. You've accomplished what you set out to do. Jackson nodded slowly. Cole's dead, the gang's scattered. The territory will be safer now. What will you do next? She asked, trying to keep her tone casual despite the significance of the question. He was silent for a long moment, staring into his coffee as if it held the answers he sought. I don't know, he finally admitted. Hunting Cole has been my purpose for so long. Without that, you could stay, Rebecca suggested, her heart beating faster at her own boldness. Silver Creek could use a man with your skills. The sheriff always says he's undermanned. Jackson looked up, something like hope flickering in his tired eyes. You think Grant would have me as a deputy? I think he'd be a fool not to, she replied honestly. And there are other reasons to stay. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had grown through letters and memory during their separation. Rebecca, he began, his voice soft but intent. Before he could continue, the door to the schoolhouse opened and Sheriff Grant stepped in. Sorry to interrupt, he said, though his knowing look suggested he wasn't entirely sorry. The territorial marshal just arrived on the afternoon stage. He's asking to see you and Cole's body right away. Jackson sighed, setting down his mug. Duty calls. Go, Rebecca said, understanding the importance of official matters. We can talk later. He rose, reluctance evident in every movement. At the door, he paused and looked back at her. I received all your letters, he said quietly. They meant more to me than I can say. With that, he followed the sheriff out, leaving Rebecca with a flutter of hope in her chest and the promise of a conversation to come. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. The territorial marshal's presence turned Cole's death into an official event, with statements taken, paperwork filed, and the reward money officially presented to Jackson in a small ceremony at the sheriff's office. $5,000 was a fortune in the West, enough for a man to buy land, build a home, start a business, or simply travel in comfort for years. The entire town buzzed with speculation about what Jackson would do with such wealth. Rebecca saw little of him during this time. He was constantly engaged with officials, or responding to the many people who now sought his company, eager to hear the tale of how he had finally cornered the notorious Silas Cole. When their paths did cross, their exchanges were brief, but charged with unspoken meaning, both aware that they needed privacy for the conversation that mattered. Finally, 4 days after his return, Jackson appeared at the schoolhouse door just as Rebecca was dismissing her students for the day. He looked rested now, his clothes new and well-fitted, though he still wore his gun belt with the easy familiarity of a man accustomed to being armed. "Miss Dawson," he said formally, tipping his hat as the last of the children filed past him. "Might I have a word?" "Of course, Mr. X," she replied, equally formal though her heart was racing. "Please come in." Once they were alone, Jackson seemed uncharacteristically uncertain, running a hand through his dark hair as he searched for words. "I've accepted Grant's offer," he finally said. "Deputy Sheriff of Silver Creek, starting next week." Rebecca couldn't contain her smile. "That's wonderful news, you'll be excellent at it." "The pay's not much compared to bounty hunting," he warned, "but it's steadier, safer." "And the reward money?" she asked, curious about his plans. "Some of it's going to the families of those Cole killed," he said. "The rest? Well, I've purchased land, just outside town, 10 acres with a stream running through it. Good place for a house." Rebecca's breath caught. "A house?" Jackson took a step closer to her, his blue eyes intent on hers. "I've been alone a long time, Rebecca. The life I've led, always on the move, always hunting, it suited me after the war, gave me purpose. But these past months your letters made me realize what I've been missing. Connection, community." He paused, taking a deep breath. "Love." The word hung in the air between them, precious and fragile. "Jackson," Rebecca began, her voice soft with emotion. He held up a hand, asking for a chance to finish. "I know this is sudden. We've spent more time apart than together. But I feel I know your heart through your letters, and I hope you know mine. I'm not asking for promises yet, just a chance to court you properly, to see if what we feel could grow into something lasting." Rebecca felt tears welling in her eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sadness. "Yes," she said simply. "I would like that very much." The smile that broke across Jackson's face was like sunrise after a long night, brilliant and full of promise. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, respectful yet filled with genuine affection that held the promise of deeper passion to come. When they finally parted, Rebecca felt as though something fundamental had shifted in her world, as if all the pieces of her life, which had seemed so scattered after her father's death and her journey west, had finally fallen into their proper places. "I should warn you," Jackson said, a hint of humor in his voice. "I've never courted anyone before. I might not be very good at it." Rebecca laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. "Well, I've never been courted, so I won't know the difference. We'll learn together." Over the following months, they did exactly that. Jackson proved to be a considerate and attentive suitor, escorting Rebecca to town socials, accompanying her on Sunday walks, and joining her for supper twice a week. He brought her wildflowers picked from the prairie and books ordered specially from Denver. In return, Rebecca helped him plan his house, suggesting practical layouts and decorative touches that would transform the simple structure into a home. She introduced him to more of her favorite poetry and delighted in his thoughtful responses. The town watched their courtship with approval. Jackson, once feared for his deadly reputation, became a respected figure in Silver Creek. As deputy sheriff, he was firm but fair, and his presence alone deterred most potential troublemakers. When trouble did come in the form of drunken minors or the occasional would-be outlaw, he handled it with minimal violence and maximum efficiency. As autumn painted the surrounding hills in golds and reds, Jackson's house was completed, a sturdy 2-story structure with a wide front porch and large windows to capture the magnificent views. He showed it to Rebecca with pride, pointing out features he'd included with her in mind: bookshelves built into the walls, a bay window perfect for reading, a kitchen designed for someone who enjoyed cooking. "It's beautiful, Jackson," she said, genuinely impressed by the craftsmanship and thought that had gone into every detail. "It's missing something, though," he replied, a nervous edge to his voice that she rarely heard. "What's that?" she asked, looking around the well-appointed main room. Jackson took her hands in his expression solemn but filled with love. "A wife," he said simply. "Rebecca Dawson, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife, of making this house a home with me?" Though she had anticipated this moment might come, the reality of it still took her breath away. "Yes," she whispered, tears of joy gathering in her eyes. "Yes, Jackson, I will marry you." His kiss this time was deeper, filled with all the passion and promise of their future together. When they finally parted, both breathless, he pressed his forehead to hers. "I love you, Rebecca. Have almost from the moment I saw you, brave and beautiful in that stagecoach. And I love you, Jackson X," she replied, her heart full to bursting. "My hero who rode from the smoke to save me." They were married in the Silver Creek Church as the first snow of winter dusted the ground outside. Rebecca wore a gown of ivory satin ordered from St. Louis, while Jackson looked uncommonly handsome in a new suit, though he still wore his gun belt. Old habits died hard. The entire town turned out for the celebration, which lasted well into the night. Even the territorial marshal returned for the occasion, bringing news that the last of the Blackwater Gang had been captured or killed. That chapter was truly closed now, leaving Jackson and Rebecca free to begin their new life together without shadows from the past. As they drove to their new home that night, the moon hung full and bright in the clear winter sky, casting the snow-covered landscape in silver light. Jackson helped Rebecca down from the wagon and then, to her surprise, swept her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. "Welcome home, Mrs. X," he said softly, setting her down in the entry hall, which glowed warm and inviting with lamps they had left burning. "It's perfect," she replied, looking around at what would now be their home together. "Everything I ever dreamed of, though I never knew it until I met you." Later, as they lay entwined in their new bed, Rebecca traced the scar on Jackson's temple with gentle fingers. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Giving up the freedom of the trail for a settled life?" Jackson caught her hand and brought it to his lips. Not for a moment. The trail was lonely. "Empty? This is everything I never dared hope for." As winter gave way to spring and spring to summer, Jackson and Rebecca settled into the rhythms of married life. He continued as deputy sheriff, earning the respect of everyone in the growing town. She taught at the school, expanding the curriculum and encouraging her students to look beyond the boundaries of their small community. Together, they built a life rich in love, mutual respect, and shared purpose. Their home became known for its hospitality, with frequent gatherings of friends for meals and conversation. Rebecca started a book club that met in their front room, while Jackson helped organize a town militia that trained regularly but, thankfully, was never needed. 1 year to the day after the fateful stagecoach attack that had brought them together, Rebecca shared news that brought tears of joy to Jackson's eyes. They would be parents by Christmas. Their daughter, Lily, was born on a snowy December night, with her father's blue eyes and her mother's auburn hair. 2 years later, they welcomed a son, Samuel, completing their family. Jackson proved to be a devoted father, reading to the children each night and teaching them to ride almost as soon as they could walk. Rebecca balanced motherhood with her continued teaching, bringing the children to school with her when they were old enough. As Silver Creek grew into a proper town with a railroad connection and even a small newspaper, Jackson was eventually elected sheriff when Grant retired. Rebecca wrote articles for the paper and helped establish a proper town library, donating many of the books they had collected over the years. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, Rebecca and Jackson would sit on their front porch, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in spectacular colors. They would reminisce about their unlikely beginning, a terrified young woman in a besieged stagecoach, and the determined bounty hunter who had appeared like an avenging angel through the gunsmoke. "Do you ever miss it?" Rebecca would sometimes ask. "The excitement, the danger." And Jackson would always smile, pulling her close as they gazed out at the life they had built together, the flourishing garden, the corral where their horses grazed, the swing he had hung from the old oak tree for the children. "Not for a moment," he would answer truthfully. "I found something better than excitement, Rebecca. I found peace. I found home. I found you." And in those moments, with the man she loved by her side and their children sleeping safely nearby, Rebecca knew that no adventure could compare to the quiet joy they had found together in this wild, beautiful land they now called home. Years passed, and Silver Creek continued to grow and prosper. Lily and Samuel grew into fine young adults, with Lily following in her mother's footsteps to become a teacher, and Samuel showing his father's sense of justice by studying law in Denver before returning to serve as the town's first proper attorney. On their 30th anniversary, the town organized a celebration to honor not only Jackson and Rebecca's enduring marriage, but also their contributions to the community. The small frontier outpost where they had met was now a respectable town with paved streets, a proper school building, and even electric lights in the main buildings. As they stood together, surrounded by friends, neighbors, and their now grown children, Rebecca leaned close to her husband. "Did you ever imagine, all those years ago when you rode after that stagecoach, that this would be your reward?" Jackson, his dark hair now streaked with silver but his blue eyes as keen as ever, smiled down at her. "Best bounty I ever collected," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "And I'd do it all again in a heartbeat." In the years that followed, they watched with pride as their grandchildren were born and the 20th century arrived, bringing automobiles, telephones, and other modern marvels to Silver Creek. Though the West was no longer quite so wild, Jackson and Rebecca never forgot the frontier spirit that had shaped their lives and their love, a spirit of courage, determination, and the belief that even in the most dangerous moments, hope could ride out of the smoke to change everything.